Hi everybody, Laura here, and today we are going to work on some different stitches. I'm making my slip knot that I showed you in our casting on video. One thing that my little mommy pointed out to me is that you and I are working in opposite directions because, you know, unless you want to come sit in my living room with me. See, I'm just wrapping around back to front to cast on. Unless you want to come sit in my house with me, the best we can do is have a screen between us, and this screen, because I need to be able to start and stop, this screen projects me backward to you. And as best I can tell, it does not actually matter what direction you're working in. So long as it's in one direction. I've seen people make mittens. Some mitten patterns actually don't care what direction you're going in, because you make the same mitten and then you just wear it upside down or not. Other people, I'm just going around again with that back to front circle around each peg. This is our cast on with E-wraps. Anyway, other people make more specific mittens with like a thumb and the way they fold the stitch over. You know, it's particular. So in those cases, you would have to know what direction you're knitting in, but we're not getting crazy. Okay. So there we go. Remember, just loop that over. Pull each loop over your peg. That's nice. And my mom is very excited, as my mom tends to get about things, to learn how to do this loom knitting. I can't believe we didn't teach her years ago. Us sisters have been enjoying this for so long. We left poor mom in the dust. But she knew how to knit with needles, so she's been entertaining herself that way. Okay, so now we push everything down, and perhaps you have heard, maybe you've known a knitter, you've heard the phrases knit and purl, and those are the two stitches that are used in knitting, and depending on how you arrange your knits and your purls, you get all sorts of different patterns. Now, the patterns don't work exactly the same as when you're knitting, because we're not going back and forth with our needles. We're just going in one direction. So here, I'm going to do that thing that I told you about where I work in my little tail, okay? And I'm just going to do an E-wrap around. You can make an entire hat by just continuing to wrap every peg with an E-wrap. And this makes a knit stitch. It looks like a knit stitch. There are two ways to make something that looks like a knit stitch. This is one of them. We wrap all the pegs. Now, because we're knitting in the round, see, we stop at our belly button. We started here, we're stopping here, and that's a row. And we just lift it over again. See, that's one way to make a knit stitch. And when you run this all the way up, you form something called a stockinette stitch. Now that's what's different than knitting with needles. Because when you're knitting with needles, you would do one row of knit and one roll of purl to make a stockinette stitch, which looks like little, here, look on my sweater. See how it looks right here? Just like little V's running up. That's your stockinette stitch. And on a loom, you accomplish that by just running knit stitches. Now, the only issue that you have with a piece that's just a stockinette stitch is it will curl on the bottoms. So if you don't mind a curled look, fine. Or if you're sewing, maybe you're making squares and you want to sew them together, that will, you know, weigh itself down. So that is one way right there, E-wraps. And you'll make a stockinette stitch. Another way to do a knit stitch is something, I want to say my first booklet that I had called it a blanket stitch. See, look inside just for now. See, we've got little rows with a space between them. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. Anyway, so instead of wrapping all the way around, you can just run your yarn in front of your peg and loop over. That is also going to give you a knit stitch. Okay, it's a tighter knit stitch than your E-wrap knit stitch, and you need to be careful with it because, as I mentioned in my other video, the first time I did it, I just ran it straight like that without giving it any slack, and my knit became so tight that my pegs actually snapped right off of the loom, which was a crying shame. It was a lovely loom. And so I wouldn't do it that way again. This is nice for if you want to make like a cuff or a brim of a hat a little bit tighter so it sticks on your head, or on your wrist. So you might want to use this stitch to get something super tight. Maybe you're making a sock, and the top of the sock, you might want to run your knit stitch like this. I'm just going to do a whole row of these so you get the idea, and then I will teach you the only way that I know how to purl on a loom. Now, interestingly enough, the back side of a knit stitch looks like a purl stitch. So there's that. I think the purl stitches are lovely. Okay, and I'm going to tell you here, okay, that's one row of knit stitch by blanket stitch. I think that's what it's called. Regardless, you know what my inner monologue calls them? I call knit stitch uppies and purl stitches downs or unders. And that's what my head's saying when I'm making a thing. So let me show you a purl stitch, or an under as I like to call it, uppy and under. Okay, so see, we've been taking our yarn and going up here, right? Now we are going underneath, and we're going to stick our needle through the loop that is attached to our peg. And with that, we are going to scoop up our ball yarn and make a loop with that. Then we are going to pop the loop that is on the peg off, and we're freeballing here for a minute, and we will take our ball yarn and slip it over the peg and pull it tight, and that's a purl stitch. Let's do that again. It's a little trickier. So through our peg loop, we run our ball yarn underneath. See, this is attached to my ball. So our ball yarn under here, And we are going to scoop that up, make a loop, and we are going to pull off of the loom for just a moment, and we'll put our new ball loop on our peg. Is that making sense? I hope that makes sense. Otherwise, just watch along. See, I have a hard time watching other people. I'm like, what sort of witchcraft did you just perform? I can't always follow along. I need so much help in this world, understanding anything, unfortunately. Okay, so we're down through the loop that's on the peg. And we are running our ball yarn underneath, picking it up and making a new loop that sticks up like a little feather in the cap. And we are popping our stitch off of the loom and replacing it with our ball loop. Okay. I don't know if you can hear, but my aunt and uncle just sent a birthday present for Basil, which included a Power Ranger and a package of soldiers and a Paw Patrol coloring book and some nice new socks. Aren't new socks the best? Anyway, the boys are having a war and a half down in the living room with their newfound treats. Thank you for that, Aunt April, Uncle Normie, if you're watching. Thank you for sending that treat. It has saved this long, boring winter day for those boys. Okay. So we're just going around and completing. When I first started out, I made the single most hideous blanket in the world, tiny, that I gave to Dorothy's doll, just so that I could experiment with different stitches. And I can't promote that idea enough. Just getting comfortable and practicing before you really try to make anything. Okay. So what we've just done here, we have made one row, well, we made 2 rows of knit, but let's just talk about the one we did before this was a knit row, and now we're doing a whole purl row. And when you run like that on needles, you would create the stockinette stitch. But since we're on a loom and we're not switching hands, we create a garter stitch, which is really lovely to look at. It makes a thicker sort of weave than just running a stockinette stitch, a little bulkier. And you know, if you live in a cold place like I do, a little bulk to your knitting is nice. You see what we're doing here? We're still just purling around, practicing our purl. And because we've done a row, if we were to do another knit row after this, we would be well on our way to a lovely garter stitch, right? Right. Oops, see, and now see, I almost lost it. Almost. Pick it up just in time. Isn't that nice? You know, really what looms did for me, because I just could not figure out how to knit on a needle, and this made sense to me. It gave me access to the wonderful world of yarn, which I just love. Just looking at all different yarns, and I like buying yarn, and I like all the different colors and the different textures, and I like hand knit things. But just the whole thing is so relaxing. And when you're like me and you have little children, one, they like when I make them treats. But two, they like when I like sit and watch cartoons and all sorts of boring things, you know, for me as an adult. And loom knitting has really saved my sanity, because when I'm sitting there, I can be making something and they feel satisfied that mommy sat with them, and I feel satisfied that I did something other than watch, you know, Paw Patrol. Okay, so I have shown you how to purl and 2 ways to knit. Now, just knitting on the loom, knit, 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 is going to make a stockinette stitch. A row of knit and a row of purl is going to make a garter stitch, right? Now, if you do a knit and a purl, a knit and a purl, you get 2 different things depending on what you do with your next row. Okay, so remember, this was knit, this was purl, this was knit, this was purl. If in our next row, this remains knit and this remains purl, and this remains knit and this remains purl, we're going to get something called a rib stitch. A rib stitch is very often seen with cuffs and socks and brims of hats, because it pulls in your weave and it makes it tighter. And doing a rib stitch also keeps your piece from curling. It will make a nice flat panel. My favorite stitch, personally, it's bulky and it is kind of makes for a bigger product, is called a seed stitch. And that is when in one row you have knit, purl, and the next row it becomes purl, knit, purl, knit. Looks very nice. The top of that acorn hat that I showed you a few videos ago, that is a seed stitch. So let's see, what did we do? Knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl. Now I have done some different things where maybe I'll experiment with maybe 2 knits and 1 purl, or 2 purls and 1 knit, or 3 knits and 1 purl, depending on what I want to do. I really just like to see the different ways that it turns out when you do that. And you have all the information you need right now to be able to experiment and make any number of things. When we get together, we were going to make the acorn hat together, but my darling mother was talking about, you know, maybe making a hat for herself, and I'm just trying to imagine this 6-year-old woman walking around with a hat with a stem on the top. It seems like something she'd do, but it seems awfully unfair to send her out into the world like that's just okay. So maybe we should just make like a regular hat together. I could just continue on here willy-nilly, knitting however I please, and then I could just show you how to tie that off in a next video. I think we'll start with that. I hadn't planned on that, but maybe I will do that just to show you how to complete a reasonable hat for an adult to wear before we move on to making the little acorn hat together. I think that's best before my mom will go out into the world wearing a hat with a stem on the top, and it's just like, it's unfair to her to send her out there like that's okay. Okay, now see, this left us off with a purl stitch and we started with a knit. So if I were to continue going, I'm going to end up with a rib stitch, running knits and purls, knits and purls. If I wanted to do a seed stitch, I'd have to pay attention and run another purl here, right next to that one. Who cares? Just to switch it up for our next row. This little belly button is our friend in remembering where we're at. see if I want to make a little seed. What did I do already? Purl, knit, right, purl. It's our friend in remembering where we've started. Elisa used to mark different stitches off with dry erase marker. And as I mentioned, Elisa also had a different sort of loom where her pegs came out, so she could change the colors to help herself remember. And that's something that you might want to help you keep track. After a number of years, I am able to look at the back of my pieces and see, recognize which was a purl and which was a knit. So, you know, that's something with experience that works for me. And that's especially useful. I'd shown you before I was making this scarf. And this scarf, it's so hard. Okay, there we go. There, the light's shining on it just right now. So you can see what I've done is I've made a diagonal pattern on this scarf. And how I've accomplished that is by doing 3 knits and a purl. 3 knit, purl, 3 knit, and a purl. And then with my next row, see, I can see this must have been a purl here because this is a purl. So I just make sure in my next row to stagger it so the purl is one ahead of the purl in the last row. And that is giving me this pattern on the scarf with a diagonal sort of bump, which I think is, you know, lovely. I like it. I made Dorothy a hat like that one time too. So there you go. You have everything that you need now to be able to experiment and to be able to do some practicing. And we'll be able to make something when you run, if you're working in the round, which I guess I suggest for right now, because that's what I'm going to show you next, is how to get off of a round loom, how to close up the top of the hat. That will be our next video. Have fun practicing with this for now, your different stitches. One more time, right? A purl is an under, and a knit is an uppy, either in a round uppy or just a pull in front uppy. All right, you know enough now to have plenty of fun, and I will see you later. Be well till next time. Bye.